meeting.
J.B. Pritzker was in Des Moines this week and was talking about the inhumane practices of receiving, basically these migrants are still being sent by airplane to Chicago. I think the total number is 30,000 shipped to Chicago alone, and the mayors are meeting in town. They're certainly going to ask for more resources. What can the federal government do to help cities like Chicago that are really struggling with this, especially given the subarctic temperatures that we're seeing right now?
And you've heard me say this very recently about how those actions that are being taken by Republican leadership is inhumane and is demoralizing. And it doesn't lead to the safety of communities here, and so we've called that out, and we'll continue to do that. And I've spoken to this already, but I'll lay it out a little bit more. During the last year, what our administration was able to do, in corroboration with states and cities across the country, we launched this one-stop shop clinics to help eligible non-citizens get working permits and decompress the respective shelter system. That was something that local leaders and state leaders asked for, and so we were able to obviously work in collaboration in getting that done. To date, these clinics have served more than 10,000 people, so they've been effective. And another thing that you've heard us speak to is that we've provided more than $1 billion in grant funding for jurisdictions hosting recently arrived migrants. So that's been important. And look, here's the thing. I just had this whole this whole back and forth with your colleagues here about border security and about this negotiation that's happening in the Senate. That's what we would like to see. We want to do more. We want to do more, but it requires Congress to act. That is where we are now. That's why it's so important that these conversations, these negotiations on Capitol Hill with senators, both Republicans and Democrats, have been going on for the past several months. We are encouraged. We want to see the supplemental passed. It is important to get that done as well. Remember, border security was originally a part of the supplemental, so we look forward to continuing collaboration with these states, these jurisdictions, obviously, to see what else we can do. But in order to get more, Congress needs to act.
Follow up on what John was saying about deliberate war crimes. It seems to differentiate between deliberate and inadvertent war crimes. Can you say anything about what your parsing is of that phrasing? It startled me because it seems to imply that you acknowledge that there have been war crimes committed, but perhaps not deliberate.
I don't think that's what the Admiral was inferring to. He doesn't. I can speak very forcefully and say that is not what he was referring to. Look, we have been very clear about Israel's absolute right to defend itself. That's something that we say all the time, right? Obviously, this is our relationship, what we believe, as well as its obligation to abide by international law, right? To make sure that they are protecting civilian lives, whether Israeli lives or Palestinian lives. We've been really clear about that, and so I just want to be really careful. I'm not going to go beyond what the Admiral said here, and I wouldn't parse his words too much here. But we've been very clear on where we stand on what we believe we stand on. Obviously, we want to continue to have these diplomatic conversations, as the President had with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and our focus has always been making sure, obviously, no civilian lives, right? One civilian life is too many. Getting that humanitarian aid into Gaza is incredibly important. Making sure hostages, American hostages, all hostages come home, and trying to continue these pauses, these humanitarian pauses that you have seen the President lead on, and they have been very successful, as the Admiral has said.
If the International Court did rule that war crimes were committed, would the U.S. support?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. I'm just not going to get into hypotheticals from here.
Karine, does the President believe that a ban on menthol cigarettes would save the lives of Black Americans?
So I want to be really careful. There's a rule-making process that's currently happening. I'm not going to get ahead of that. That is something for, obviously, the respective agency, FDA, to kind of take a look at that. I just don't, I want to be really
I
mindful.
wasn't asking about the rule, I was just asking whether that is something the president believes.
No, I hear you. I just want to be careful because there's a process, a rulemaking process that's currently happening on that particular issue, and I don't want to comment on this rule because on your question because that rulemaking process is currently happening. FDA is doing their part. They are the experts here. I'm just not going to get into specifics of that at all.
Well, they may be the experts, but I think there's abundant research that shows that this is a leading cause of deaths for Black Americans. I'm just asking whether the president believes that could be a benefit of banning menthol cigarettes.
I hear your question, MJ. As you said, there are experts who have spoken to this. I let the experts speak to this. When there's a rulemaking process, this is always the case here. Because there's a rulemaking process, we're just not going to comment. Okay, Jackie.
Thank you, Karine. What is the administration's response to the 14 House Democrats who voted with Republicans the other day to denounce the, quote, open borders policies of the Biden administration?
What do you mean? What's our comments on what?
Would you have a response to 14 Democrats in the House believing that
Oh,
this president has open border policies?
Well, look, we've been very clear. We want to deal with what's going on at the border. That's why we're having these conversations, these negotiations in the Senate with Republicans and Democrats. The president understands that this is an issue that matters to the American people. And we feel like those conversations that are happening, those negotiations are headed in the right direction. And so the president understands. He put the border security, right? That's part of the supplemental. His request on funding for border security was part of that national security ask, that emergency ask. So we believe we need to do more. The president understands we need to do more. And we see Republicans and Democrats in Senate want to do more.
Is it still the position of the administration that the border is secure?
Our position is that we need to do more at the border. We have to do more at the border. That's why these negotiations are currently happening. That's our position.
And is it the position of the administration that the efforts to impeach Secretary Mayorkas are unconstitutional?
What we believe is that what House Republicans are doing is playing political games. That's what we believe. And they're not doing their jobs, the jobs that the American people want them to be doing. And let's not forget, they won't even let Secretary Mayorkas even testify. They want to impeach him, but they're not even allowing him to testify. And so it is shameful. That's what we believe. It is shameful. And what we'd encourage these House Republicans to do, and this is something that we saw coming out of the midterms in 2022, American people want to see Republicans and Democrats working together to deliver for them, to address the issues that matter. That's what we would rather see.
On the constitutionality portion, though, I saw that there was a memo that came out that was touting this open letter from constitutional law professors making the argument that impeachment based on policy disagreements is unconstitutional. So is that the approach the administration is taking to
What
this?
letter are you speaking to?
There was an Ian Sams memo that went out, and it was included an open letter from a number of constitutional law professors who were arguing that impeaching a cabinet secretary on the basis of policy disagreements is forbidden in the Constitution.
Well, I'm going to let my colleagues' letter stand for itself. I've been very clear on how we feel and what we think about these impeachment proceedings, and a proceeding that is not even allowing Secretary Mayorkas to testify.
I'm just trying to gather, though, because it came to us from the White House, obviously, that is this something that the administration is going to fight in court on a constitutional basis, that this is not something that could happen?
Yeah, and I will say I'm going to let my White House colleagues at the counsel's office respond to that. Okay.
A month ago today, when you were asked about whether the White House had any regrets about linking Ukraine aid with border funding, you said no, not at all. I wanted to know if that was still the case today. Does the White House have any regrets about this strategy?
No, not at all, because both of those things are important to the president. They are emergency requests. That's why he included it in the supplemental, and we believe all of it needs to move forward.
And then just very quickly on student loans, there has been some Republican criticism from people like Senator Bill Cassidy, Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, specifically saying that the president is pandering in this election year, trying to buy votes with these kinds of moves on student loans. There have been other lawmakers who've echoed something similar, saying it's not fair for Americans who didn't go to college to have to pay for those who racked up too much debt. What is the White House response to that?
No, we've heard that rhetoric many times before. That's nothing new, what you laid out to me. Look, the president made a promise that he would do everything that he can to take action to give American families a little bit of a breathing room, and that's related to student debt as well. And you heard at the top when I laid out that folks should not have to be crushed by student debt to be able to start a family, to be able to buy a home, right? And so this is what we've seen over the past several decades, and the president has been very clear. He's going to do everything that he can to give people a little bit more breathing room, to give people, make sure he lower cost for folks, and that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing that from an array of folks just across the spectrum. And so I've heard those comments. That is not something that the president believes. The president believes that it is important. You got to remember, this is a president who grew up in a middle-class family, who knows what it's like to sit around a kitchen table and try to figure out which bill are you going to pay. Are you going to pay that medical bill? Are you going to be able to pay that medical bill? Are you going to be able to put food on the table? Are you going to be able to pay the tuition for your kid that's going to college? And these are difficult conversations that American families have every month. And so if the president can do something to give families a little bit of dignity, a little bit of an opportunity to really be part of a growing economy, be part of the middle class, he's going to take that action. Okay, Sabrina.
Thanks, Karine. When the president was asked yesterday about Arab Americans not wanting to vote for him over Gaza, his response was to point to former President Trump's travel ban on Muslim-majority nations. Putting aside for a moment that most Arab Americans are Christian, is that the bar here, that his predecessor and likely opponent wants to ban Muslims and President Biden doesn't? And how does that relate to the substance of their criticism of Gaza?
So look, I want to be really careful because there's a mix of upcoming election in your question in 2024. Look, I would look at, and I really want to be mindful here and careful. I think what the president was doing was trying to give a reminder of where we were before, right? What it looked like before in the last 4 years in the last administration. You have a president that has been very clear in protecting Arab Americans or any communities that are under attack, any communities that have felt left behind. And so he is, I think his record and what he's been trying to do for folks here in this country, all communities, including the Arab American community, is very, very clear. And so I think it was a question that he was asked. He answered it very quickly. It probably, he thought of it as obviously asked in a political way. And so that's where he went. But I just also want to be super careful because this is an upcoming election.
And then away from the campaign then, since the conflict began, the president has sat down with Muslim leaders only once that we know of, on October 26th, and there was only one Palestinian American who was present for that meeting. Why has the president not met or engaged more directly with Palestinian American leaders in the more than 3 months since this conflict began?
Well, as you just stated in the top of your question, he has had direct conversation with and leaders in the respective communities. His team has stayed in touch with members and leaders of those respective communities, as you just laid out, Arab Americans and Muslim Americans as well. And so those conversations are obviously very important. I don't have anything to read out or lay out of any upcoming discussions with those leaders in those communities. But he's had direct conversation. He's had listened to them. Those were private conversations. We try not to read out specifically what was discussed, but obviously the president and his team has been in regular communications.
Thanks, Karine. Monday's obviously the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Do you have any preview of what the president plans to do to mark the day?
Yeah, so as you know, the campaign made an announcement of the four principals here. The president, the vice president, the first lady, and the second gentleman are going to do an event on Tuesday and touch on Roe v. Wade. I would refer you to them on exactly what that's going to look like. And the vice president's going to do a tour specifically focusing on Roe v. Wade. So certainly would refer you to the vice president's office, and certainly we'll have more to share on that. All right, I'm being told to wrap it. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks, Karine. On Wednesday, when you were asked about ahead of the meeting, Speaker Johnson's HR tour bust position, you had said Speaker Johnson's not the only congressman in the room. He's held to this hardline position, but
Was there any indication from House members who were present in the meeting or in other conversations that have been had with House members that there is a possibility of them taking on a Senate-passed agreement? Like if an agreement were to be reached and passed in the Senate, has he gotten any kind of assurances that the House would take that
So
on?
I will say, I think there was broad agreement in the room in that meeting that they needed to deal with Ukraine and also the border. So there was a broad agreement there. I'm not going to get into specifics on how that would look like, but I think that's important. If both Republicans and Democrats in that meeting are saying, yes, we need to deal with this, we need to figure out how to make sure we support Ukraine, we need to figure out how to make sure we deal with the border security, I think that's important. And so that is what we were able to get out of that meeting as well, that type of understanding of addressing those two things.
But is he optimistic that even if the Senate is able to come to an agreement, that it would be taken on and passed in the House?
I mean, look, I'll say this, I'll add to this. It was a balanced and constructive conversation. That's what we saw, that's what happened. And there was, again, broad agreement to certainly deal with making sure Ukraine gets the funding that they need, making sure that we deal with border security. So that is the two important things that came out of that meeting. We are going to continue to have the conversation in the Senate, do the negotiations in the Senate on the border security to get something done, something that the American people want to see. And then we'll see what happens. I don't want to get into hypotheticals. I don't want to guess what's going to happen. Obviously, Speaker Johnson's been very vocal and he can speak for himself. But it is important. It is important that we see a bipartisan agreement, bipartisan conversation happening, and we'll see where it goes. But the president's going to continue to encourage, obviously, Congress to move forward. Go ahead, Joe. I hadn't called on you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, regarding the House, and a version of this question was asked, I think, during the Air Force One gaggle yesterday, but with Speaker Johnson saying he's communicating regularly with former President Trump on border negotiations, does the White House believe that Speaker Johnson is, in fact, negotiating in good faith toward an agreement on the border?
Look, I'm going to let Speaker Johnson speak for himself. What I can say is that right now we are in active negotiations with members in the Senate, and it is in good faith with Republicans and Democrats. It is happening in good faith, and we are encouraged by where the conversation is going. We believe there has been progress, and so let's start there. Let's start there and let them do their job and continue or do their negotiations and continue to have those conversations. And I'm just going to let the House speak for themselves.
Do you think Speaker Johnson actually wants a border agreement?
That's for him to speak to. I'm not going to speak from here. I know I keep getting. Did I call you, Ouija?
Quick follow on the border talks,
Okay.
very quick.
Okay.
Is the president open to signing a border deal before one is reached on Ukraine, or does it have to be concurrent?
I can't speak to the timeline of all of this. What I can speak to is we are having those conversations in the Senate, negotiations, as I've mentioned multiple times already from here. I'm sure you're tired of me saying that over and over again. And what I can also say is that we want to see the full national security supplemental move forward. That is what we want to see. We want to see it move forward, and that includes Ukraine, obviously includes Israel, obviously includes border security. That's what the president wants to see, and that is the direction that we hope that it goes in. All right. I haven't called on you. Go ahead.
So is the White House supportive of the bipartisan tax bill that was introduced this week that expands the child tax credit but also has a lot of cuts for businesses?
So we think that we are encouraged by what we're seeing, obviously, with the tax deal that is going forward. And so we think that's important. Obviously, the president passed the American Rescue Plan. As you know, very early on, it had the child tax credit. The president has been very clear that he wanted to see that move forward in full, and it's continuing that more permanently. And so that is important. But we are pleased that the House Ways and Means Committee advanced a bipartisan tax bill that will increase that, right? That will increase it. And so, and let's not forget, this is for millions of families. It's going to lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty and support construction of hundreds of thousands of affordable rental housing as well in that bipartisan agreement. So it is a welcome step forward, and we believe Congress should pass it. All right, guys, we'll see you on Monday. Thank you, everybody. Stay warm and dry.